It's great to have everybody here, and it's great also to be having this fourth seminar, which had to be rescheduled after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine from this time last year. So we're very, very pleased that this seminar, which is looking at Central and Eastern Europe, has finally been able to take place. It is the fourth seminar in the series. Some of you will have seen all of them, but for those of you who didn't, the first one looked at Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and England. The first one looked at those UK countries and Ireland. The second one looked at Flanders, Denmark, Germany, and Czech Republic. The third one looked at Spain, Italy, Croatia, and France. And the fourth one today is looking at Austria, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Poland. So as you can see from that, we have had a really good wide reach across Europe. The discussions in previous seminars have been the papers have been brilliant, and the discussions around them have all been fantastic. Each of the speakers has talked about the situation in their own country, which governs the way in which big infrastructure archaeology projects are responded to archaeologically, what is required to take place. There's some of their comments on what actually takes place, and then presented some studies of particular projects as examples of what works, and in some cases what doesn't work as well, and examples of the ways in which that information has been used. And what we've aimed to do in this series throughout is consider both the positive impacts that infrastructure projects can have on the understanding, knowledge, and study of rural medieval settlements. They can, of course, provide opportunities for settlements to be investigated in more detail than would otherwise be the case, excavated sometimes in ways that wouldn't have been possible had the infrastructure development not taken place. And in many cases, they may actually discover formerly unknown medieval rural settlements. And we've seen all of these instances turn up in the papers we've seen so far. And now, looking at the region we're looking at today, we will be able to see how that pans out in other areas. But we've also had an opportunity, of course, to look at the threats that these infrastructure developments can cause, particularly when they're ending in the wholesale destruction of settlements, or where those settlements that may have been discovered actually aren't investigated appropriately, or what we might consider appropriately, and that the potential benefits that infrastructure investigation occasions actually aren't gained from, and also considered whether the information that comes from those excavations, however good that may be, or indeed other sorts of field work, however good that information might be, what happens to it afterwards? How accessible are the results of those investigations, both in terms of archive information being accessible either to other people working in developer-funded archaeology, or to academics working in universities or other researchers, or indeed to other members of the public who may be interested in the archaeology of their communities or their region, or indeed just interested in medieval rural settlements. And in some cases, there have been very good initiatives to ensure that information is available. In other places, it's been seen as much more problematic, that actually it's very difficult to get that information. And then some speakers have also thought about publications that have come from this. To what extent have this information been synthesized to interpret its significance in a way that, again, makes it more accessible, because we have vast amounts of information that have actually been generated through infrastructure projects across our I hope I'm unmuted again now. So we need the investigation, we need the access to the information, and we need that information ideally to be synthesized so that it can advance knowledge and understanding. And that, of course, helps make the argument for the investigations and the recording to be done in the first place, because if we can't demonstrate that it's helping advance knowledge and understanding, it's more difficult to justify to developers who may not be inclined to wish to pay for that, whether that's the state paying or whether it's private developers. We need to be able to make that case. And of course, for all of this, it's about what is this telling us about the study of the medieval countryside and rural settlements within that. What is it telling us about their development and indeed where they are? And of course, what is it telling us about how threatened they are by these sorts of infrastructure developments? And can all of that help us by looking at this across our whole continent? Can it help us come up with a better idea of how best to do things, both from the legislative framework right through to synthesis and publication? And to that end, we're hoping to publish the results of this series of seminars now that we're on the final one. I'd like to say thank you very much to everybody's speakers. We have the 4 speakers who are listed on the programme from Austria, Bulgaria, Hungary and Poland. We also have 3 panel members who, after the 4 papers have been given, will be giving their brief 2-minute summaries or 2-minute thoughts on what their thoughts on the papers we've heard. We've had this panel discussion on each of the seminars so far, and it has been a really valued opportunity to get comments from people who are experts in rural settlement and rural settlement studies, to draw together their thoughts, whatever they might be, on the 4 papers they've heard and the issues they think they arise. And then after that, we'll go on to questions from the audience, which will be chaired by Gareth Davis from the York Archaeological Trust, who's also a committee member of the Medieval Settlement Research Group, who have organised this series of seminars. And we'll then have questions from the audience. Audience is very, very welcome, and the speakers and panelists, of course, as well. If you have any questions to any of the individual speakers, please type those into the chat and the Q&A as soon as you think of them. And Gareth will be curating those questions, and he will share those, and we can then ensure we don't get duplicate questions asked, that everyone gets at least some of their questions answered. So please type any questions into the chat. We won't have questions on each of the individual papers immediately after those papers. The speakers have got 25-minute slot. We'll speak in that. We'll move straight from one paper to the next with questions at the end. So I think with that introduction in place, the final comment I would make is, of course, this seminar series has been put together by the Medieval Settlement Research Group. There will be an advert slide for that during the breaks of this morning's meeting. The Medieval Settlement Research Group, which I'm currently the president, exists to further the study of medieval rural settlements. It has, I think, a particularly strong focus in the UK and Ireland, but we are very interested and committed to internationalising this further across Europe. And this has been one of the reasons for this series of seminars, looking at an important issue, but very much across our continent, because we have medieval rural settlements across our entire continent. Many of the themes around their origins and development are common to our continent, or indeed different across it, and those differences help us understand the factors that affected the origins, development, material culture of those settlements, and what it tells us about life in the medieval period, and particularly in the countryside. So if you're not already a member of the Medieval Settlement Research Group, do please join. We have conferences twice a year. We have a spring conference. The spring conference is coming up in about 3 weeks' time, over the weekend of the 14th and 15th of April in Wales. That's an in-person conference. And there's also a winter seminar as well, usually in early December. And we publish an annual report as well. And if you have work that you'd like to publish in that report, we'll be very pleased to see that. And we also offer small grants for field work as well. We're a relatively small organisation, so they're not huge grants, but we can offer a small amount. So do have a look at the MSRG website.